Hi there, what a nightmare. A crushing defeat by Arsenal, Jadon Sancho falling out with our manager Erik Ten Hag, a growing injury list that resulted in Maguire and Evans both on the pitch when we crumbled at the Emirates. The club has serious cash flow problems and talk of the Glazers wanting to stick around for at least 2 more years. When Manchester United Football Club have problems, it's global news, and it's painful hearing every media organisation magnify every last detail. Predictably, there's been a lack of outrage at the way Sunday's match was decided by questionable decisions. Instead, it feels like the knives are out for our manager, and that, in my mind, is a travesty. Ten Hag was right to question why all 3 big decisions at the end of our match with Arsenal all went against us. And Jadon Sancho is bang out of order for what amounts to a mutinous statement about why he feels like a scapegoat. I've listened to the Ten Hag post-match press conference, and he simply said Sancho wasn't selected because he's not been performing in training. It was an honest response to a question by a journalist, and not a premeditated singling out of Sancho. We've all seen with our own eyes Sancho hasn't been great in matches, and he was given plenty of minutes in the pre-season tour out in America. For Sancho to respond with his social media statement contradicting his manager is a huge error of judgment by the player and his advisors. The speed with which the statement was made suggests his agents want him out of Old Trafford. Either way, I don't see this ending well for Sancho unless he makes a convincing apology. Meantime, I think it's important to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and consider why our football club is in such disarray. Truth is, the manager still hasn't got the squad he wants, partly down to players on huge contracts not willing to leave. We're even still paying most of Mason Greenwood's £75,000 a week wages while he's out on a season-long loan at Getafe. It's an absolute mess. The club is struggling both on and off the pitch. And the overriding reason why is obvious. This is all on the Glazers. The owners make all the big decisions at our football club, and over the past 18 years, they've overseen a steady decline that's transformed the whole atmosphere and outlook of our football club. So instead of chasing the biggest trophies, we're now conditioned to accepting top 4 as our primary target. And let's be honest, the way the season has started, we may struggle to finish anywhere near the top 4 this season. So where do we go from here? Clearly, Erik Ten Hag faces a huge challenge to match what he achieved in his first season in charge. And while I do believe the manager will turn things around eventually, this is not going to be easy. Rasmus Højlund looks like he's going to be a big player for Manchester United, and it's already obvious that Andre Onana gives us a totally different way of playing out from the back. Personally, I'm looking forward to seeing Amrabat strengthen our midfield, but it's going to take time for all our new players to bed in. Meantime, the whole backdrop of uncertainty created by the owners is going to linger and fester like a bad smell. At the weekend, it was reported by the Mail newspaper that the Glazers want to wait another 2 years to sell the club, believing by then the value of Manchester United may be as high as £10 billion. It's pure selfish greed by the owners, but it doesn't surprise me. I'm sure it doesn't surprise you either. As I said in my update 10 days ago, I do believe the Glazers decided not to sell Manchester United Football Club a while ago, for the time being at least. Our American owners are effectively telling fans that their protests are meaningless and they'll do what they like with our football club. It's a shocking state of affairs that I believe can only be resolved with government intervention, unless the English Premier League itself suddenly decides to make drastic changes in the rules about ownership. As followers of this channel know, I've supported fan protests from the start, and I was calling out the Glazers long before they put the club on the market 10 months ago. Despite the busiest transfer window we've seen for years, including 7 new signings, don't be fooled that the club is in a good financial position. It's not. And that begs the question, how are the Glazers going to fund a business that's in serious decline? As we've seen over the past 18 years, the Glazers don't communicate, and that again is part of the problem. They really don't care what the fans think, and they're not going to tell us what they're doing unless they have to. So it's news from the New York stock market that's likely to be the most reliable source of information going forward. You certainly can't rely on what you read in certain tabloid newspapers, like the Sun newspaper, who claimed a deal has already been done to sell Manchester United Football Club. This weekend's story in the Mail, on the other hand, confirms what I heard myself from a source in the Glazers circle when I was out in America over the summer. What matters now is how will the fans and football in general respond to the growing realisation that the Glazers want to stay. In my view, it's all about what happens next, because protests alone are just not having any real effect whatsoever. And suggestions that the fans will boycott matches are just ridiculous. It will never happen. It's time to take a different approach. We have to start by looking at the bigger picture. Since our Arab-controlled neighbours, Manchester City, have become so dominant, the Premier League does risk losing some of its appeal. Many fans believe the only way to compete with the Gulf state-funded club is to sell our soul to another Gulf state, as Newcastle United have done, but that's not an overnight solution, as the Geordies are finding out this season. And more importantly, it's not good for the game. If football is dominated by 2 or 3 super-rich Gulf states, then our game is eventually going to lose its qualities that money just can't buy. Its jeopardy, its integrity, and its dream factor, where any club can rise from the lower reaches and enjoy a taste of glory, like Leicester City actually winning the Premier League, or clubs like Wimbledon and Wigan winning the FA Cup. When Manchester United dominated the Premier League, our massive global fan base helped make the Premier League the most watched competition in the world. The joker in the pack for the greedy Glazers is that they know any future Super League, whatever form that may take, is incomplete without the massive fan base of Manchester United. And that fact alone guarantees they will fight to retain ownership of our football club as long as they possibly can. As United's protesters keep singing, Malcolm Glazer is in a box. But the brains behind the Glazers' much maligned leverage takeover has left behind an ownership model that can't be challenged without government or league intervention. Elite football clubs are priceless community assets. And in my view, it's a national scandal that the biggest club of them all has become the personal money tree of one family in America that don't even go to our games at Old Trafford. When the Glazers tried to steal the game itself with their ill-conceived European Super League a couple of years ago, the British government publicly supported the fans' demands to stop it. Then Prime Minister Boris Johnson declared the government would use a legislative bomb to stop the Super League if required. Since then, of course, we've seen the UK government flex its muscles and force a sale of Chelsea Football Club. So let's be quite clear here. The government do have the power to kick the Glazers out of Manchester United Football Club. But it has to be in the public interest to do so, or at least it has to be perceived to be so. It's now down to the fans and football as a whole to make a strong enough case to demand this happens. There are many arguments for why the Glazers are unfit owners of the world's most famous and most popular football club. There are many levers the government can use to protect football clubs if they're persuaded it's in the public interest to do so. And ultimately, they could change the law to bring in a rule like the one in Germany, where fans are guaranteed a majority stake in clubs. I'm not suggesting fan groups should be running football clubs. Clearly, that would never work. The role of the fans is to keep owners in check who fail to act in the best interests of the football club. As things stand, we are a long way from demanding remedial action in the public interest. The 1958 group have given the media a new focal point and mobilised protests at the stadium and online. They've done a great job, but fan groups have failed to unite across the board under one unified banner, while so-called fan channels are more interested in growing their audiences than working together for a common aim. What we have seen, and it's been an extremely slow process, is a government-funded fan-led review. Consequently, there's now a new football regulator in the pipeline. But how much power will that regulator have? And will the regulator get rid of unfit owners already in situ? According to the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, the regulator's job will be to protect the rich heritage and traditions of our much-loved clubs and safeguard the beautiful game for future generations. But while we allow the Glazers to run amok as they're currently doing, it's clear to any independent observer we're definitely not currently protecting the rich heritage and traditions of Manchester United. And if we allow this to continue indefinitely, who knows what will be left of our football club for future generations. Sadly, I don't currently see a unified fan base demanding action. The 1958 group have done magnificently well managing protests, And some of us have done our best to broadcast and promote those protests. But let's be honest, the fan base is so divided that most matchday going fans don't take part and don't believe they can make things change by protesting. At this point, it's clear the Glazers have won the battle of wills because the protests have made absolutely no difference and the Glazers are still the owners. Until we get overwhelming public support for removing the Glazers as unfit owners, I do fear they're here to stay. As I've previously said, the Glazers can see the upcoming World Cup in America and the game's booming popularity in the States is growing the football business. By the time the USA hosts an expanded 32-team Club World Cup in 2 years' time, soccer will be reaching an all-time peak as we count down to the 2026 FIFA World Cup in America. Meantime, the way Saudi Arabia are currently distorting the shape of football and its landscape makes the Glazers more bullish than ever about how the value of Manchester United will continue to grow, whatever happens out on the football pitch.